Thank you, Chief, and thank you for the town hall. I appreciated the presentation from your staff, both DC Urena and Lieutenant Bradley. So thank you for that. I want to read something real quick from an article before I go into some of my questions and some of my suggestions, so that you and all of you have an understanding of where I'm coming from on this. I sent this article to Brad, to yourself, Chief, and to Connie a while ago, but it's called Nowhere to Go, Homelessness Among Formerly Incarcerated People. And it's big research. It's a ton of research on, there's a piece that talks about the revolving door and homelessness. And I think people in our community love to talk about the revolving door of crime. And so I want to talk about that as it relates to homelessness. This says, we find that people experiencing cycles of incarceration and release, otherwise known as the revolving door of incarceration, are also more likely to be homeless. People who have been to prison just once experience homelessness at a rate nearly 7 times higher than the general public. But people who have been incarcerated more than once have rates 13 times higher than the general public. In other words, people who have been incarcerated multiple times are twice as likely to be homeless as those who are returning from their first prison term. There's more research on here about the racial aspects of it and how Black and brown folks, then the rates are even higher for them. The next piece says, unfortunately, being homeless makes formerly incarcerated people more likely to be arrested and incarcerated again, thanks to policies that criminalize homelessness. As law enforcement agencies aggressively enforce offenses such as sleeping in public spaces, which is what Grants Pass is trying to criminalize, panhandling, and public urination, some might argue shopping carts could be included here, not to mention other low-level offenses that are more visible when committed in public. Formerly incarcerated people are unnecessarily funneled back through their revolving door. So, I think often I get criticisms about, I think that my frame of work and when I approach issues of homelessness, I think people often think of my compassion as a liability. But really, this is my frame of work, right? This is my philosophy that as a social worker, I deeply understand that once people have a criminal record, they're much, much harder to find housing, much, much harder to find jobs, and those kinds of things, right? So the barriers to entry to housing just become incredibly more difficult. And so I do have concerns about the criminalization of some of these pieces, but I just have some questions before I get into some suggestions, Chief. There's technically 3 things you presented, right? 2162, 2163, and then the shopping carts?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you just talk a little bit about what the enforcement will look like for those things? Like maybe for the aggressive panhandling, like once a call comes in, I'm assuming you're gonna wait for somebody to make a 911 call and said, this just happened to me at the Albertsons parking lot.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Pro Tem, unless it's observed by the officer, they see behavior that's clearly aggressive panhandling, they could obviously take action. But a couple things. One, when it comes to aggressive panhandling, it's a little bit different than, say, even solicitation. I want to stay away from panhandling. Solicitation on private property where there could be an educational process beforehand. Part of that's posting the signs. Part of that's trying to get cooperation from the person without having to take enforcement action. When it comes to aggressive panhandling, depending on the behavior and the cooperation of the victim, there may be enforcement action as a criminal citation right then. If it's violent behavior, let's say the person punched them, threw something at them, hit them, there might be a physical arrest in that case, more than likely. I'm not sure if that answers.
Yes. And then on the roadway, for example, are you sort of waiting is this when an officer sees a person on the roadway is when an enforcement will happen?
So on that one, Mayor Pro Tem, that one would be a lot more education as a change in the ordinance. So making contact, ensuring that people understand where they can be and can't be. And again, we can only regulate that behavior, time, manner, and place under those very strict guidelines. And so if someone's on a sidewalk soliciting without being aggressive, that's not going to be criminalized under this ordinance or any ordinance. But if the person's entering the roadway, depending on what the behavior is, more than likely it'd be education first. After a period of education with the update to the ordinance, then there may be enforcement action taken if necessary. But again, that would be a citation or a summons.
Okay. And then the shopping cart ordinance so I heard you a couple times say that the officer potentially could take the shopping cart. So what will that actually look like? There'll be yeah, I'll just let you answer that.
Mayor Pro Tem, again, the way I envision it, if it passes, is to develop these projects where we have all the resources we need to actually deal with it. So a patrol officer, our call volume is incredibly high in this jurisdiction and higher than most. So patrol officers going to a domestic or a burglary in progress are not going to stop and deal with that when they see it. It takes time. It's going to take 30, 40 minutes to deal with it because their property is their property. So if something is property, it has to stay with them. We're not going to discard their property, nor could we legally. And that means finding a way to balance those two things. And there's different options like I talked about. So when we do the projects, it allows us to have more resources in place so that we can address all these nuances of the ordinance. I'm not sure if that answers it, but.
What pieces of these three that you proposed are new?
Obviously the shopping cart ordinance is new in its entirety as far as how that ordinance doesn't
right,
exist.
the asking for businesses to submit a plan and those
Yes.
kinds of things. The enforcement of that aside, the enforcement is not new, right? You already said shoplifting is already a crime.
Right. So Mayor Pro Tem, again, if the ordinance failed and we wanted to just do enforcement, we could do that. We could go out and just start charging people with receiving stolen property or possession of stolen property. That's not the goal in of itself, because we talked about at the town hall, enforcement is a piece in this, and it has to be a piece in it, but it is definitely not the only part of it, and we cannot arrest or cite our way out of any problem, including this one. But if we exclude that as an option, we also can't solve the problem. I think we've seen that in many other places, including outside of the United States. So there has to be this balance between the two, and that's why this holistic approach is what I would prefer, because it allows us a lot more opportunity to reduce the number of carts taken, have the businesses help us help them. And then there's less people that are even in the predicament where they have a shopping cart with their stuff in it in the first place.
Thanks, Chief. Couple more questions. On the businesses, have you or any of your team spoken to folks at Walmart or Albertsons or any of these folks that are having their carts taken at a higher rate?
Yes, actually, Mayor Pro Tem, I spoke with one of the managers of one of our local Walmart stores, and they were in favor of it. If you would have asked them maybe a year or 2 years ago, they probably would not have been. But it's gotten to the point where there's many times where they don't have the carts. They're ordering so many shopping carts. Monetarily, the business is actually going to save money, whether that's a smaller business or Walmart. And so all it is a little bit of time and inconvenience to implement this plan. But at this point, the ones I've spoke to are in favor of it.
Okay, thank you. I do have a lot of criticisms about Walmart, and honestly, I have little sympathy for them and their stolen property. I think perhaps if they hired more people and stopped automating so much of their services, they would have more people in their parking lots picking up the shopping carts that people leave behind, but that's for another work session. I do hope that they come to the table. I think that when we talk about if someone comes into my yard and steals something from me, we want to try to prevent those things. But if someone comes into my yard, I'm also going to make sure to do things that prevent that in the future, right? And I think Walmart, specifically places like Walmart and some of these other bigger franchises, I think have the resources to do anti-theft measures, and they choose not to. Instead, they choose to rely on our local police enforcement to try to do that for them. So I want to push back against them a little bit, that I think they do have a lot more responsibility when it comes to this effort. I do want to know just a couple of things before I continue with my questions, that Mano y Mano, for those of you who don't know, who are in the room, Mano y Mano is a day labor program out of Community of Hope that takes people who are currently unhoused and gives them work to go clean up areas that have been left for encampments. And so I think there's a lot of narratives and a lot of dominant narratives about unhoused people, that they don't want to work, and those things are just not always true. And so I did want to just note that Mano y Mano is an incredible program. I have some questions for Brad as well, if that's okay. Brad, do you know how far away we are from SOS being in place?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem. In my conversations with the municipal court, it's my understanding that we are not very far away at all. My best guess would be probably 2 or 3 months away.
2 or 3 months away? Okay.
We're getting very, very close. The municipal court now has a case manager on staff. They've hired, I believe, 6 additional new staff members that are traditionally what we would think of as clerks, but they will be assisting that case manager with helping to plug some of our more vulnerable population into services around town with our local partners. And so, by the way, that's a guess, 2 or 3 months. I would say 6 months on the outside, just based on my conversations with municipal court staff, but I do think that it is happening very, very soon, and I, for one, am optimistic about it.
Okay, thank you. I think if the goal of these is really to sort of push people to municipal court so that they can get then services, and the goal is not to criminalize, then I would ask that shall this happen, that it be implemented once SOS court is ready.
Noted, Mayor Pro Tem. If I may briefly respond to something that was said earlier.
Sure, go ahead.
Councilor Corrin brought up an excellent question earlier, and I'm not sure if I will even answer it as eloquently as Chief Story did, but her question, Councilor, your question was, if this ordinance was enacted, what would be different about this person that had 14 carts? And my answer, and I'm not speaking for Chief Story.
I was asking about the person who broke the window, not the 14-cart person.
I misunderstood your question.
Sorry. I understand the
Okay.
context for the cart person. I was asking a different question.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, sorry.
No, I misunderstood, but my hope would be that it wouldn't happen because we would have the onus on the business owners either to take some ownership, no pun intended, or responsibility for their own property. That's the whole purpose of the shopping cart plan. And also, as Chief Story said, enforcement is not the primary goal here. Plugging people into treatment services would be the primary goal.
Brad, in your experience as an attorney and being in many courts probably, right now is using treatment as an expansion of community service.
Yes.
How often are you seeing that happen?
I am seeing it more and more often within the last year since the New Mexico Supreme Court made a ruling that treatment is an acceptable substitute for community service, whether that be substance abuse counseling, mental health treatment, or a combination of both. I am seeing it much more often, on a weekly basis, I would say.
And for that to work, the judge has to come to that conclusion, right? The judge has to propose that, but then the person also has to agree to it, correct?
That's right. That's right, Mayor Pro Tem. So let's say hypothetically, someone was fined in the amount, and this goes to a point that Councilor Flores brought up earlier. Really good question also. What would happen if someone were fined, let's say $200 through the municipal court? Well, we always have to have an ability to pay hearing. Oftentimes that would occur at a sentencing on a dispositional hearing for a criminal offense, let's say. So let's say someone is fined $200 and that person says, Your Honor, I cannot pay $200. You're fining me $200. For me, I can pay $200, me personally. For some people, $200 might as well be $200,000, and we understand that. And so what we would hope is to impose, after an ability to pay hearing, community service in lieu of that $200 fine. And if that person so chooses, with the assistance of our new case manager, we could plug them into services that would satisfy that community service obligation. And hopefully, we'd be treating the person as an individual rather than just seeking to punish conduct. We're trying to make sure that the conduct doesn't happen in the future.
Brad, right now, there is also something in an ordinance that says if you fail to pay, that's an additional $100, correct?
Not if you fail to pay, Mayor Pro Tem. If you fail to appear for a court appearance, let's say there's a pretrial conference, and notice goes out to that person, let's say at their home address. Let's say that we're not dealing with an unhoused person, just me. Let's say I get a citation through the municipal court. I will get a notice at my house, at my mailing address. Let's say if I had a P.O. box, and let's say I get that notice and I don't show up to court. Well, then a bench warrant more than likely would issue for my arrest, and there is a $100 administrative fee for processing the bench warrant that I believe as of right now, only this governing body can waive. I don't believe that the presiding judge has the authority to
Correct.
forgive that.
Correct. I think for me, that would be another important missing piece of the puzzle as we move forward. I brought this up during council comments before, and I think would love to hear from municipal court staff about what this looks like, because it just creates a debtor's court. And for someone who may use 999 West Amador as an address, just to have an address, that doesn't mean that they're consistently checking for mail there.
That's right, Mayor Pro Tem. It is a challenge that we face on an almost daily basis, and this is not just with regard to some people that we think is homeless. There are many different, as you know, there are many different, I don't want to say levels, but types of unhoused scenarios or home insecurity. And so some people might have a home 1 month, and the next month they don't. And then the month after that, they might stay with a friend or a family member. What I can tell you that we try to do in the municipal court is we try to make sure that these people, any person, gets notice in as many ways as possible. Some people prefer to get their notice by email. You'd be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't be, at how many people, unhoused or otherwise, just simply prefer to get their notice via email. If they have a mailing address, it becomes much easier. I know that Community of Hope has been providing a great service with regard to receiving mail and being a willing recipient of people's mail. The challenge with that is they only hold it for so long. We can't expect them to hold it for a month or 2 months. So if someone doesn't come collect their mail after about a week, I think that they dispose of it. But we hand deliver notices. So if someone comes to court in person and they have another hearing in 45 or 60 days, what we try to do is actually hand them physically a copy of their notice for their next hearing. Is it a perfect system? No, it's not, admittedly, but we do the best we can.
Thanks, Brad. And then with SOS Court, let's say a person, all things align, and a person chooses, the judge says, yes, this person could definitely do community service or an extension treatment or whatever, and that person chooses to do that. Does then the crime get removed from their record?
So, no, not automatically. So in New Mexico, about 4 or 5 years ago now, we do now have an expungement process in New Mexico via statute. We did not always have that. So anytime you get arrested, if you are arrested, that is in a number of databases, whether it be an FBI database, our local database, et cetera. It would potentially show as dismissed, but would it still be on that person's record? Yes, it would, unless they apply to the 3rd Judicial District Court for an expungement of their criminal record after a requisite time period, and there's nothing we could do about that. That's state statute.
Is that a free process? Can anybody do that, or would I need to have an attorney to expunge?
They don't have to have an attorney. It would be much easier with an attorney. And so that's something that we might want to think about, reaching out to our nonprofits with regard to providing pro bono legal services. Every attorney in the state of New Mexico is encouraged, as Councilor Flores knows this bit, to provide so many hours each year of pro bono services. And so maybe that's something that we could attempt to organize.
So an expungement process isn't necessarily something easily accessible to everybody. You'd have to be pretty in the know.
For an attorney, it would be easy. For a layperson, I think it would probably be somewhat confusing, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Brad.
you,
I see
Mayor.
Chief coming up.
Okay.
I don't know if you had something to say about this.
I did, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. And there's ultimately 2 parts of the SOS program. There's the diversion program, or part of it, and then there's the post-conviction. So really what we're talking about is the post-conviction. They've already been found guilty, or they pled no contest to one of these charges, and then as a condition of essentially their probation, that their sentence is community service and treatment in lieu of that. But ultimately the goal is to do the diversion program where
Right.
if someone's a candidate before it even gets to a conviction, they have the option of engaging in this treatment program, and if successful, then the charge is dismissed outright and there's no conviction on their record at all.
Okay, thanks, Chief. I'll get into this diversion here in a second, but I think there's just a couple things I wanted to add. I think there's you had this sort of narrative around perception versus reality. And for me, I think this is where I struggle with both of these ordinances, because I think that from my professional experience, especially the shopping cart ordinance, I think is feeding more into a perception of safety. I don't actually believe that it brings about real safety. And I think it's going to create a bunch of more barriers for unhoused people who are truly trying to seek services or will eventually be ready to seek services. And I think one of the things that worries me, many of these things worry me about this, but one of the things that worries me the most is that when the community who is here, who is really advocating and pushing for these things, begins to see that there's still people panhandling. Like, that's still an issue. There's serious poverty in this community. There's serious need for housing in this community. There's a serious need for mental health services in this community, right? And so when people continue to see that there's still people panhandling on the street, that people still are carrying their belongings, whether it's their tent or their blanket or whatever it is, right? When people still see it, I think they're going to come back and say, you're not doing anything. And I don't want them to say that to you, because I know your officers work really hard, but I know they're going to say it to us, and they're going to say that we're tying your hands. They're going to say city council is tying your hands to be able to do your job. And I'm not asking you to answer that, Chief. I'm just posing that as a potential concern that I have as we go on and potentially implement this. That's one of the things for sure. For me, diversion is incredibly important. I think, I don't know, I might be in the minority with my colleagues around some of these pieces. And so if they're going to move forward, I have 3 asks as we move forward in creating these. So for you as well, Brad, but for city manager and yourself. One of them, I think it's as we approach people who are unhoused and have a shopping cart, or as we approach somebody who is potentially being aggressive in their solicitation, that there be a needs assessment conducted of that person, whether it's the officer or whoever it is that approaches that person. And I'd be happy to work with advocates, perhaps the new caseworker at municipal court, to come up with what this would look like and to really understand what this person is going through. Because if our goal really is towards rehabilitation and diversion and to fix the problem, then I think it's important that we understand what that person is going through, whether it's housing needs, whether they qualify for benefits and they don't know it, whether it's a medical issue that immediately they might need something, whatever it is, to conduct a needs assessment. Number 2, I would love to know if there's language that can be added around whenever possible, especially around aggressive panhandling, for the use of the light team. Something that for me has always been really important when it comes to diversion is that we pair the right first responder to the right emergency. And if we are encountering someone that who is already in an altered state, that potentially may have a mental health issue, and sometimes the presence of a uniform will escalate that, right? Like that's just true for many folks. Nothing you may have done, just the presence of a law enforcement agent may increase the tension. And so whenever possible and if available, we know that our Project Light folks are incredibly busy and are responding to a ton of calls, but whenever possible, that Project Light is also, I want to say issued out, but that's the wrong word, that they're also responding to that call. Thank you. And then the last thing that I really want to ask her, that I deeply believe is necessary, is for us to grow the community outreach team at Community of Hope. Right now, there are 2 folks that I wish we could clone into 100 people. But right now, those 2 folks are completely overwhelmed. But they are folks who deeply understand the experience of being unhoused, folks who have training in dealing with folks who have mental health issues. They have incredible training, and right now there's 2 people. And I really believe that If we increased that team, if we grew that team, they could be a good partner for law enforcement. They could be a good partner for municipal court. And so I would like to make an official request for the growth of that team. And I will even have a dollar amount for you. I think it's important that the folks who are doing that work also have better pay. I think it's incredibly difficult work, and I would like to see them get an increase in their salary, and I would like for the city to support that. So like I said, I would like to increase the existing outreach team with 2 new outreach staff. And then I would also like to increase our hotspot truck. I think the Mano y Mano program has been incredibly successful for a long time, and even more successful since we implemented a hotspot truck that is allowing for us to go into even private areas where there has been clearly an abandoned encampment that was there. And folks are picking up these things. And I think there would need to be a purchase of a new truck. And so I would say $235,000 for the staff, and then an additional money from that, so maybe $300,000 for an additional vehicle for Mano y Mano. To me, I think as we continue with these, if we continue with something like this, I think I deeply believe that we actually may be making things worse, and that really concerns me. But as we move forward, I also want to make sure that there is as much harm reduction as possible. And I want to come to the table, and I want to be a good team player. I don't want to just say, no, I don't believe this, period. I want to come to the table, Chief, and I think you know that that's where I'm coming from. And I know that after this meeting, potentially there'll be a lot of criticisms about what I had to say here today, but I'm a big supporter of the outreach court at municipal court. In fact, I was the one that brought that idea to council, and it's moved forward to what it is now. But I want to be able to bring some potential alternatives as well. So that would be my request. And I'm going to stop talking now because I can hear my voice getting hoarse. Thank you.